Here I'm hiking on the New York and Pennsylvania border, and if you listen closely, you can hear that I'm hiking in the rain. Luckily, most of the leaves up top in the canopy are taking the brunt of it, so I'm relatively dry, but the moist and humid conditions of the day means I get to see herps. Lots of them. In this case, eastern newts. I could not go 15 minutes without seeing one on this hike. Not that I'm complaining. I love these guys. Eastern newts, like many other salamanders, undergo a metamorphosis. In late spring, females lay between 200 to 350 eggs in the water. 3 to 5 weeks later, the aquatic larvae hatch. Living their life underwater, they mostly feed on microcrustaceans and insect larvae. Fast forward 2 to 3 months, and we get the first metamorphosis, and the version of these newts that I am most familiar with after seeing so many on this hike. They become juveniles and also adopt the cute nickname efts. They lose their gills, become land-walking and terrestrial rather than aquatic, and their skin fills with poison glands. As is usually the case in nature, their newly developed bright orange color lets predators know about their toxicity. Anywhere from 2 to 3 or up to 7 years later, we get the second metamorphosis, putting us at the adult stage. They revert to being principally aquatic, and they lose their bright orange color. They also become 10 times less toxic as adults compared to their juvenile counterparts, which just so happens to be the case for humans as well. Since the F stage is the only time in the eastern newt's life that it's primarily terrestrial, that's when people are more likely to see them, myself included. They can look pretty similar to red salamanders. An easy way to distinguish them is that red salamanders have black spots all over their backside, whereas efts have a row of orange spots with black borders. Efts also lack these cute little love handles known as coastal grooves that red salamanders have. Eastern newts weren't the only amphibian the rain drew out. On the same trail were many a toad. Or frog. Honestly, not too sure. I found a bunch and my guess is that all of them are American toads, for a couple of different reasons. If you look at all the frogs and toads found in New York, more than half can be eliminated just from the markings alone. Fowler's toads and American toads bear the most resemblance. Now, I'm on the New York and Pennsylvania border, so that eliminates the chance that these are Fowler's toads. If we dig a bit deeper, there are some interesting anatomical differences between these two. Both toads have spots on their back, with each spot containing warts. American toads have only 1 to 2 warts per spot, while Fowler's toads can have more. You can see right here that this toad doesn't appear to have multiple warts on each spot, but the video footage doesn't make that completely clear. Another point of interest is the position of the parotoid glands relative to the cranial crests. Parotoid glands are poison glands that sit on the toad's shoulders. American toads are covered with warts that secrete a sticky white substance that nauseates potential predators. However, predators usually tend to bite down right on the parotoid glands, so that's where most of those secreting cells are concentrated. Cranial crests are just the L-shaped ridges that sit slightly behind the eyes. The distance between cranial crests and parotoid glands can be useful in distinguishing Fowler's toads and American toads. Fowler's toads have their parotoid glands right up against their cranial crests, while American toads have a noticeable gap between theirs. The confusing thing is, my toad here doesn't seem to have any kind of gap, indicating that it might be a Fowler's toad, despite what the geographical location and wart density would have me to believe. The last clue I could have used had I flipped this toad over would be to check its belly for spots. American toads have spotted bellies, Fowler's toads do not. This is also, of course, assuming that all of the animals are the same kind of toad, so if you couldn't tell already, I did not get a good look at the smaller ones to make any kind of positive ID, so take that as you will. Anyways, as useful as those parotoid glands and warts may be, they don't make American toads invincible. A lot of snakes have developed ways around those defense mechanisms. In fact, common garter snakes are particularly resilient to toxins secreted by amphibians, which is fitting because a garter snake was the last herp I saw on this hike. Fun fact, garter snakes are named after men's stocking garters. Much like this antiquated piece of clothing, garters are also striped. They typically have 3 light stripes on a darker body. That fact also makes them a little trickier to identify. Sharing much of the same territory as well as the striped appearance is the eastern ribbon snake. Like the garter, the eastern ribbon snake prefers wetter habitats, so it's no surprise I found the snake hanging out dead center of the trail, where the ground would be moist due to the lack of coverage from the trees compared to the hideout it eventually went into. Anyways, because of this resemblance, it's hard to make a conclusive ID on the snake, but my best guess is either a common garter snake or an eastern ribbon. I wish I could have gotten better footage of the snake, but I'm not about to tear up the ground and dig it out of its hideout. I don't want to disturb the environment in this forest. The woodlands of Pennsylvania and western New York are gorgeous. Not just the animals, but the plants as well. One of the more interesting botanical spectacles I found are these fruits of cucumber magnolia trees. The cucumber in the name refers to these cucumber-shaped fruits. They start kinda green and yellowish and turn this deep reddish purple when ripe. The seeds within are this vibrant red-orange color. I found these fruits all over the forest as I was hiking, but didn't find any trees with the fruit still intact until I came out of the trail and onto the road. Or so I thought. At first glance, I assumed these rotting fruits were the same fruits I had been seeing in the forest. Turns out this is actually sumac. In Pennsylvania, there are a handful of different kinds of sumac around. I believe this is Staghorn Sumac, named after the felt-like texture of its branches, similar to that of a stag's antlers. The fruits are edible and apparently make a great lemonade-like beverage, but please don't take this video as an endorsement to eat anything you find in the woods. I'd imagine that this is a pretty advantageous spot for the sumac plant, much easier to catch some sunlight out on the open road. The inside of the woodlands are dense and the lack of light is really punctuated in some areas. Those same conditions are also what makes birdwatching in dense woodlands somewhat difficult. I usually have better luck spotting birds by large bodies of water or trails with smaller plants rather than gargantuan trees. But here's the thing about birdwatching. Sound can be just as good an identifier as sight sometimes. Listen closely to this bird call and see if you can tell what kind of bird it is. That's a black-capped chickadee. They have a very distinct sound. In fact, that sound is part of their name. Chickadee-dee-dee. Note that it isn't the only sound they make, but it is their most distinct. The infamous chickadee-dee-dee call often indicates a predator is nearby and has been spotted. The number of D's corresponds to how serious the threat is. I'm fairly confident that it's a black-capped chickadee just from my location, but even if I did have a visual, some chickadees are incredibly hard to discern from one another. Want a real challenge? Look up how to visually discern Carolina chickadees and black-capped chickadees. Anyways, yeah, don't let the visual conditions bring you down. Use your other senses. Though this time being in a somewhat dark and gloomy forest alone also makes other aspects of the hike difficult. Namely the fact that I was in a location known to be populated by black bears. Starting the trail, I didn't think it would bother me that much, but when you're 4 hours deep in a solo hike in the Pennsylvania wilderness, it's best to take some precautions. Namely, I just started making noise every once in a while. That's a good way to avoid a bear encounter. Did I mention I didn't tell anyone what trail I would be on as I was doing the solo hike? Yeah, not my brightest moment. Be smarter than me. Happy trails.
Oh, and that looks like scat.